Let's give a warm, responsive welcome. So stand up with me. And we're going to give a warm, responsive welcome to Shelby Wolpa and Suzy Welch. Let's have you flip just so that the slides, I know they like it when they match. I was thinking my AV team, but hearing that you do as well. All right. I'm not going to belabor intros because I want both of you to introduce yourselves and a little bit about each of your work. But it's an honor, it's a privilege to be up here on stage with really incredible operators, consultants, incredibly powerhouse, influential women doing incredible work in the world. Shelby, I'll start with you if you'll give a brief introduction.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Robin, for having us. This is my first responsive conference, but I've been following along for years, so very happy to be here. It's been a great 2 days. So, a bit about my background. I've been in the HR field for over 20 years now. The bulk of that was as an operator, so as a head of people, coming into startups around 100 employees and then scaling them up to 1,000 employees, getting really bored and annoyed with what that job was. And then I'd go jump and go build again. Very proud of the fact that of those four, they all reached unicorn status, and two are three, excuse me, three of the four are now thriving public companies. So I feel like I did something right in kind of those early stages of building the People Ops Foundation. But after four grueling unicorns in a row, I was ready for a break. And I also felt that my impact could be scaled far more than one company at a time. So 5 years ago, went out on my own. We're going to get into it today. But I've been a solopreneur for the last 5 years, advising startups, mostly sitting in between the head of people and the founders, kind of moderating that challenging relationship, helping support the next generation of people leaders, and also helping founders to like really level set on what does good HR look like, what is realistic for a head of people to accomplish, sometimes being a team of one, what resources do they need, what support do they need. So um, and then I spend a lot of my time now also coaching and mentoring other HR consultants as they build and launch their careers. Some of them are smiling at me, which I appreciate. Um, and that's been very fulfilling too.
Hi, I'm Suzy Welch. I'm a professor of management at NYU Stern School of Business. As part of my work, I developed a methodology to help people figure out in this very complicated world what to do with their lives. It's a very scientifically backed and research based methodology. It's called Becoming You. And I teach that along with teaching management. And we have an initiative on purpose and flourishing, which does the sort of research behind what we do. And we're very fortunate to be able to teach people from outside of NYU at the initiative and certify coaches and so forth.
Awesome. Um, so I wrote a book in 2017 called Responsive that entailed interviews and a deep research on about 100 different practitioners. And one was your late husband. So I uh, knew of you and had read several of your books before Dustin introduced us and you agreed to come on stage. So it's a real privilege to have you here. I want to start with you a little bit, Suzy, because I feel like you undersold yourself there in what the initiative on purpose and flourishing is. When I mentioned becoming you and that you were coming on stage, the people who came out of the woodwork saying like purpose as a principle, as a need in the world is so present. And there's a almost a cult like following towards the work that you've started to do in the world in the last several years. So for folks who aren't familiar with the initiative and with Becoming You, can you say a little bit more?
Okay. I'll be very brief. Thank you for your kind words about my husband. I'd say that, um, unbeknownst to me, my work around purpose and flourishing had kind of immaculate timing. I didn't plan it that way, at all. It was several years ago. My husband had had a long sickness, and prior to that, I'd been doing a lot of work in the purpose and flourishing area. And then after he died, I had thought, well, what's my purpose now? I had been part of a sort of a two-person universe. Our work had been together, and I thought, well, maybe I'll take this methodology that I've developed, and I'll spare you the details of all the ways it was developed, and I'll see if anybody's interested in learning it. And so I approached NYU, where I knew the dean of the business school from my previous life, and said, "I've got this class that might help answer the question, what should I do with my life?" And he said, "Well, we can try it as an experiment." And I said, okay. And I remember thinking to myself, what in the world makes me think I can do this? So I did end up teaching it. And here's the funny thing: in coming out of the pandemic, if you go to a bunch of people who are in their 20s and say, hey, want to take a class on how to figure out what to do with your life? This is one of those, if you build it, they will come moments. The class was met a need that was ferocious, and people strongly needed everybody was being told to live their purpose, but nobody was telling them how to find their purpose. Like, yeah, of course I should live my purpose, but where do you get that information? Do you just pluck it out of the sky? Well, I had this methodology, and I'll be very, very brief. Uh, the methodology posits that your purpose lies at the intersection of three data sets, and those data sets are your values, your deeply held beliefs and motivations, your aptitudes, which are inborn cognitive and emotional, not skills, but your gifts. And also then your economically viable interests, which is the work that calls you emotionally or intellectually, but will also pay you according to what your value around money is, because not everyone has the same value around money. So I wanted to teach a class that would help people excavate these three data sets. And along the way, I discovered that I was not the only person working in this field. Along the way, I was also developing very rigorously with a wonderful group of data scientists, psychometricians, and others, um, tools to help people excavate their values. I think there's people in this room who have taken some of these tools, like the Values Bridge, and we have a bunch of different tools that help you excavate all of this very difficult data. Um, and I was doing research along the way that was underscoring that people talked about values, but no one actually knew what their values were. This was data that I already knew, but it was incredible to see it confirmed the way it was. So in this period, I was in the dean's office moaning and groaning, as I was always wont to do. I was always up in his office saying, "We need this and we need that." And I said, there's no place for all the academics and practitioners who are thinking about flourishing and purpose right now to talk to each other. How do we find each other? I am randomly calling up professors at different universities when I come upon their work, and I'm saying, "Hi, I'm a random professor from NYU in this field. Let's talk." And he said, "Well, why don't you create a institute right here at NYU at Stern?" And I was like, "Okay," because like I had no idea how to do that. And he said, "Go ahead, why don't you try it?" And so, but very, very fortunately, I was very quickly entered into the sphere of Dustin Liu, who many of you know, who was at Stanford doing this with Design Life and Life Design. And I went out to Palo Alto, and in the longest dinner ever conducted in the history of humankind, I hypnotized him and convinced him to come with me. And we built this initiative together, had a magnificent run with it because people are desperate to talk about this. And secondly, there's really smart people doing important work in this field. And so we're off to the races. And the work of the initiative and the work I'm doing in my own lab is dovetailing. And now I'm happy to report Becoming You is taught in gigantic mega sections at NYU, and we offer every month we offer a large course to people outside of NYU. People come from around the world to take Becoming You, and much to NYU's credit, when I went to the dean's office and said this isn't fair, we need to democratize the deliverable of this course, this methodology. They were like, "Yeah, we do." Which was fantastic. Not a lot of schools would say that. And they've made NYU available to us to be able to teach Becoming You. And so it's just kind of been, believe me, so much, none of this, none of this was planned, but I've just gone along for the ride.
In third grade, I was in a class titled "Who Are You and What Is Your Purpose?" And I don't remember anything that happened in that class, but I have carried with me to this day the
Third grade's
title.
a little young to start that work. I don't know what
Um,
those teachers were thinking. I mean,
we're also going to come back to Dustin because he was a volunteer at Responsive Conference last year and is a dear friend of obviously both of ours. Shelby, you also, I feel like, downplayed because I hear the logos of the, or the hear the brand names of the companies that you have helped build and take a step back. Palantir, One Medical, Instacart. What's fascinating to me, and we've known each other 5 or 6 years now at this point, is for the longest time, I would hear you talked about as somebody who was, for example, spearheading remote and distributed work, both pre COVID and then, of course, post COVID. But when we got on Zoom, we would talk about entrepreneurship and we would talk about the lonely journey of building a company or having employees or trying to fire clients despite needing to hit payroll. And so when we talked about you coming on stage, it was about your journey of reinvention and about going from this pretty prestigious people leader role into something that I know very well, which is the ups and downs of building for yourself. What sparked that? What was the spark of that journey? Because that's something that I think a lot of people, Doug Kirkpatrick recently on stage talked about courage, right? That is a core part of, in my experience, figuring out purpose is looking at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, thank you. Um, so when I first got started in consulting, and it's weird to talk about yourself like this, but people would say, "Oh my gosh, you're an overnight success." And I would say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa." First of all, this has been like 10 years in the making. This has been a goal and a journey and something that I had been kind of planting the seeds and building the foundation of for quite a long time. But I was also on kind of this like designing my life spiritual journey at the same time. So most of that startup experience was here in the Bay Area. But at the same time, I was also going through a long fertility journey, having my miracle baby daughter. And my husband and I are also originally from Texas. And so, kind of wrapped up in this was a lot of like work with my husband and my family, like trying to figure out, like, what do we want? Like, what is the future life that we're trying to design? We have this one big, beautiful life, and how do we want to spend it? So, I also had done some like designing my life workshops in San Francisco with friends and like fun nights, like, 6 hour dinner kind of things, trying to answer those important questions. So for me, when I was thinking about kind of stepping out of the operator role, um, the things that were important to me, kind of the values that were on my list, were one was I had one child, and so I wanted no regrets with her upbringing. That was one thing that was like very vitally important to me that I wanted to look back on parenting and have no regrets. So I didn't want to miss the field trips. I didn't want to miss being room parent, all that kind of stuff. And when you're in an operator role, you just don't always have control over those decisions. Um, Something that else was important, and I touched on this earlier, was that I really wanted to expand my impact beyond one company or one team. I really felt like I had a lot of knowledge and wisdom to share. I had also been through the trenches as a people leader and kind of that first HR hire that I mentioned before. Um, I had learned a ton. I recently dyed my hair, but it's covered in gray because of all the lessons and all the wisdom. Um, and I really felt I could make a bigger impact. I also there was just a lot of parts of the job that I didn't like, so I wanted to be able to design, like, I just really don't wanna ever think about those parts of the HR world again, and I really wanna focus on the things that light me up, and I'm passionate about, and I wanted to, like, pick and choose my clients, like Robin said. I've been very lucky, that I've only had to kind of politely mutually fire 3 clients out of the, like, 40-ish that I've worked with over the last 5 years. Um, but to really choose founders and companies that I was philosophically aligned with was, like, such a freedom and such a gift.
I want to double click into a couple of books and influences and talk about the specific pieces that impacted you from each, right? A shared fondness for Tim Ferriss's The 4 Hour Work Week, which was a big part of the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. Similarly, Die with Zero, which just before we started talking about, my now fiance had on her bedside and was reading. So those two, in addition to No Regrets Parenting.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for reminding me. So, that was definitely a part of that journey. I had read The 4 Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. It's probably been, like, 10, 12 years at this point. But I'm one of those people also that if I, like, get stuck on an idea, like there's no going back. I'm like, this is the way. And then there is no other way. And my whole advisory practice, like for the last 5 years, has been built on that model. So, in its purest form, Tim, said, what is my like core passion? What is my niche? What is the thing that I can, charge my clients the big dollars for? And then let's outsource and automate like everything else in our life. So I've taken that to an extreme, and the way that I work with my clients is on a retainer model where I meet with them 1 hour a week. I like to have 4 to 5 clients at any given time. So if everything's going according to plan, I am working a 4-hour work week. Although there's way, way, way more that goes into that. And then I get to fill all the extra time with kind of passion projects and other side things that I can talk about more later. But that was kind of the first step, reading that book. And then Robin mentioned Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that book, but highly recommend it. But just beware, because once you read it, you may be like, this is the way. And now I have to follow this model. But to summarize that one, um, he essentially calls out the way that most Americans live is that you kind of slave away in your 9 to 5 job, working towards this retirement goal of, hopefully retiring by 65, but that you may have all these life goals and aspirations and things and like adventures and trips and other things that you want to do that you may not be alive to do, may not have the health to do, may not have the means to do. And so, really, engineering that the other way and saying, what are all those experiences that I want to have? And when is the time in my life that I want to have them? I think if most of you are kind of Bay Area people, it's been the norm for a while to like take sabbaticals in between jobs. Like how I grew up in Texas, like, and with my father's generation, you never quit a job without having the next job lined up. My father, even today, I've been in this work and been quite successful for the last 5 years, but my parents still don't think I have a real job. Like they still think I just like travel and don't make any money, or I don't know what they think, but they don't think it's real. And anyway, so the Die with Zero methodology was really helpful for me and my husband to, again, it's just like kind of these, I'm coming back to these moments of like really checking in on the values. We kind of, as a family, I would say every 6 to 12 months have like those dinner table reset conversations to say, okay, like what shifted? Like we have these norms in our family. Like, does this still work for us? Does it not? Like, okay, my husband takes the big, executive job. I may need to pull back and kind of like do the parenting thing more. And anyway, so it's a constant evolution.
Suzy, you've made a study of these pivotal points in people's lives, and I want to go into some of the tactics. But before we do, you've had these deep rabbit holes into a bunch of different domains. And I'm curious if you could choose one and describe sort of what you were doing, let's just say as a reporter, and then what came next, right? And knowing a lot of the backstory of your story personally, but a lot of the audience doesn't, I'll let you choose one. But what created the turning point where you went from one of these career paths that could have taken you the rest of your life into the next one?
Well, they couldn't take me my whole life, otherwise I would have stayed in them. I mean, I was a print reporter, and print reporting went away. While I started my career as a reporter at the Miami Herald, and it was a fantastic experience. I learned a lot. It was a great time to be a reporter in Miami in 1981, and then I just did the most mature, poised. I ever. Fire door. Okay. Um, I did a very mature, poised thing. Everybody in this room is a very thoughtful person, so I will just reveal myself to not be one. But when I was like 24 years old, I followed a boy and I went up north. I was down in Miami and I was like, he's cute. I'm going after him. And that's how a lot of careers things happen. And so I don't actually see my life as going down a lot of random rabbit holes. I see it as a absolutely very natural evolution of one thing to the other as I continue to sort of go along that journey where I got closer and closer to living a life that was at the intersection of my values and my aptitudes and my interests. I didn't really know much about business, but as soon as I was assigned to cover business, which happened very serendipitously, I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever learned. And I came from a family of hippie artists. My dad was an architect. My mom is still an artist. My daughter's an artist. I've come from a family of artists. I have 4 children. And And I thought, wow, business is fantastic. I don't know enough about it. So I did a very natural thing. I went to business school to learn about it. I mean, like, where do you learn about stuff? Well, you learn about it at school. So I went there, although I may be the only person who ever went to Harvard Business School to learn about business. Everybody else was there to, network. And I did learn about business there. And I discovered that I had, unbeknownst to me, I had no idea. I had very strong aptitudes in finance. I was recruited to get my PhD in finance. I'm very heavily recruited to do that. And I was like, I think you got the wrong girl. And they're like, no, you're better at this. And I did wonder why everyone thought it was much harder than me. I was like, I don't get it. Are they all just a bunch of whining, moaning babies? This is so easy. And that was the sort of first clue to me that I had an inborn, no credit. I didn't do it for myself. I was wired to have a natural aptitude for math and finance. And so then I blended business and journalism and became a broadcast journalist in because print was going away. And I went on to NBC to cover business news, and since had my own show on CBC for many years. But I did. It was when Jack got sick. It was very hard to continue in daily TV because for the morning shows you go to work at 3 a.m. and it just became impossible. And when he entered hospice, I decided to pull back from that and stay at home with him. And after he died, I didn't want to go back to daily TV. I was 59 years old, and I had been doing daily TV for 20 years at that point. And so I came up with the idea of teaching. So I see this as a very natural evolution, and it makes perfect sense to me. Although I guess it doesn't make as much sense to you, but there is a sort of a flow to it that makes sense.
I'm reminded of the Steve Jobs, Stanford graduate talk about looking backward to connect the dots. Right. I certainly feel in my career that I can tell the compelling story looking backwards, but I would have no idea from the previous step what the next step would be.
Well, how could we? I mean, it's very hard to do that in life, and there's just a lot of things that get in the way of us planning our lives. Some of our own manufacture and some of other people's. I used to say teach my students that there's the four horsemen of values destruction, all starting with E. The first being expectations, and the expectations we have of ourselves, and then the expectations others have of us, which are huge noise. You actually, it was very interesting, mentioned, I don't know what my parents think about this. And like, why are we still thinking about what our parents, I think about what my parents think. Up until the day my father died, I was like, I wonder what dad thinks. Like, I'm 65 years old, and then there's events get in the way. We have kids or we get fired, and that totally takes us off the path that we thought we were going to have. Then there's just expedience. It's just easier. Sometimes chasing your dreams and doing what your values would drive you to do is hard. You have to, as I like to quote the Beastie Boys, you have to fight for your right to have your values. And then just money is very loud in our heads. And what the sad thing about money is that we can live our whole lives, and behavioral economists would tell us that we do live our whole lives based on making decisions around economic security. And then we discover at like age 50, the money didn't matter anyway. And then we really start digging the Talking Head song, what is this beautiful life? What is this beautiful life? My God, what have I done? And I quote that song to my students, and they have no idea what I'm talking about. Honestly, I say, the Talking Heads, and they're like, "Who?" And one time I put up a picture. I'll stop talking in a second. I put a picture of George Harrison to tell a story, and I have to say to my students, "This is one of the Beatles." And they're like, "Who?" It's true.
You mentioned earlier the values bridge. What is the values bridge and how do we use it?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking. So the values bridge, I was teaching my students to excavate their values, and we would do so much work around this. We would do 7 deep exercises, and it was just, and then we'd get to the final part of the class where we would be synthesizing our values, our aptitudes, and our economically viable interests. And what do you know? Everybody came up with the same 2 values, family and financial security. And I was like, yeah, 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 but there actually are many more values than that. And I try as I might, there's actually a pathetic picture of me in front of my students with an abacus saying, like, there's these values. And I knew a lot about values because I had done so much research into them. And finally, um, this story involves me bitching and moaning again. I was bitching and moaning to my PhD thesis advisor, and I said, there's just no good tool for measuring people's values. And there should be a tool that does this. There should be a tool that does that. I'm trying to do this in a very analog way with my students. And he said, you know what? Why don't you just create this tool, Susie? And I was like, I can't create that tool. And he said, mm-hmm. And I thought, I went to bed and I got up the next morning at 5 o'clock in the morning and I started to actually by hand create this tool. You fast forward 4 years with a fantastic team of developers and psychometricians and data scientists all around me. And we created this tool. It was released, I'm very proud to say, it was released to the public on May 6th, right, Dustin? Since then, 65,000 people have taken it. Just could not believe it. We were like, "What? What? What?" 65,000 people since May 6th, because the tool meets a need. The tool rank orders for you your values from 1 to 16. It identifies where your conflicts are, it identifies where your harmonies are, but then it does a very scary and important thing. It tells you to what percentage you're living your life of your values. It tells you whether you're living your values, whether you're an approacher, close to living your values, a thresholder, getting closer, and then all the way down to people who are divergent. I see people you're given a what's called an authenticity gap score, which is it calculates. I wrote the algorithm, so I stand by it, and it calculates the gap and it weighs your top values more heavily and so forth. And I've had people take this test and they have a total authenticity gap score of 98%, meaning they've got their values and they're only living them 2%. And this is a real moment. I've been in the room where, I mean, I've taught Becoming You now to more than 10,000 people. So I've been in the room when a lot of things have happened. It also gives you a score on how divergent you are on every single individual value. So it gives you a lot of information. It also gives us a huge amount of data. So we now have the incredible data on, we're now beginning to cut it by generation, by gender, by socioeconomic status. And I have a piece, it was supposed to be in the Wall Street Journal today about the values of Gen Z. They're held because of the news cycle and stuff that's going on. Comparing the values of Gen Z and the values that millennial and boomer hiring managers are actually seeking from Gen Z. And that's a pretty scary number. So, anyway, so the Values Bridge is a values assessment tool based on the Welch Bristol Values Inventory, which I created at the University of Bristol, which is kind of ground zero for values research in England. And it tells you a lot about your values and how much you're living them.
When Dustin and I talked after a responsive conference last year, um, described this dinner, this now infamous dinner, where you two sat down.
Please, I'm
Um,
begging you, Dustin. Yeah.
and as I said, he was a volunteer. We met through responsive conference last year, and he said, "I'm in New York." I'm like, "Wait, you came from Stanford when you came here last year on the stage?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm working with Suzy Welch." Um, we sat down and she wanted me to come build her center with her and to step in as the leader of the center with you. And the reason that I said yes was one word, and it was your driving force, which was hope. And that Susie could really kind of go do whatever she wanted in her life at this point, having lived the career that you have, but that you keep driving because you have hope for the next generations. Can you speak to that, and maybe in the light of the students that you work with?
Yeah. Okay. Uh, I think that hope is a moral choice we all need to make, and that's just my opinion. But I believe that my work enables people to have realistic hope, and that's the joy of it for me. I see people transformed from being lost to being found, and when you suddenly have direction for your life, it is a very life giving moment. I one time the dean was introducing me to a group of alumni, and he said, "Susie's built a factory. Students enter lost and exit found." And everybody kind of laughed because like schools aren't factories, right? But I like was had tears in my chest and my eyes, and I just thought if that's what I'm doing, then I am living my purpose, and it felt pretty freaking great. I don't I fear for my students and their nihilism. I fear for them. I look at them and I feel so pained because as I said, I have 4 children. They're older than my students. My oldest child is 36 and the rest are I had 4 children in 5 years, so you can do the math. And uh, they were raised in my house, so they have a lot of hope, I suppose, because I was like, constantly cheerleading in their ear, like, but I think that hope can't be irrational. I mean, I think that the beauty of the methodology from where I'm sitting is it gives people a rational way to think about hope, that there is a way forward and it's not willy-nilly, it's not woo-woo, it's not plucked out of the air. You can want to be Celine Dion and have a terrible voice. The methodology doesn't allow that to happen. The methodology says, here are your values. Now let's talk about what you're really good at, emotionally and intellectually. We do a lot of work on personality because you know as well as I do, you can be fantastic at a job because of your personality, and you can just downright suck at it because of your personality. And so we measure and talk about personality. We do 360 feedback for that reason. And then your economically viable interests. The problem is that most people just aren't even aware of that there are 135 industries. There's 12 identified mega trends. There are jobs in them, there are hills. And once you give people the data to start thinking, oh, here's a path, we now give people 5 different paths. We've created a tool that does that. Um, then people can start to have reasonable hope. And so my work is Dustin's work, the work of everybody at Becoming You Labs. We now have a company with 20 people. It's mind blowing because we're growing very quickly, and the work we're doing at IPF, the initiative, it's kind of our purpose is to um, expand the number of people who have hope about the future.
Shelby, the consulting work that you do so often with founders, and as a founder, there are many dark nights of the soul, right? Every time you step through a new learning how to do something you didn't know how to do. For me, at least, there are these moments that I'm like, I think I'm gonna go get a day job now and go work at a cafe so I don't have to deal with this. What, as you're mentoring this next generation of entrepreneurs, startup entrepreneurs, people building their own coaching, consulting practices, whatever it is, what are some of the tactics, some of the tools that you help to instill to give them hope or to give them purpose?
Ooh, well, yeah, so I mentioned earlier that like on the surface, it's like, oh, smashing success. Like, look at her. She's got all these clients. But on behind the scenes, like it's never, what it seems. As an entrepreneur, there have been so many emotional ups and downs along the way. Uh, and, a couple examples that are sticking out to me, and then I can get to the advice piece. But something that I was really struggling with the first couple years was every January, I would go into like this, like, I would get like deep anxiety and like not sleep. And what was happening was that, like, thinking as a salesperson and responsible for all of the business development of my company, I would like start over. Like, I would say, oh, well, now I'm back at zero, for my 2025 goal of earning, and get really panicked about that. And, because I'm the only one generating where my next client is going to come from. So it created a lot of stress for me. And something that my dear husband did, who is a sales leader, was like, oh, well, that's not how we think about sales. Like when we think about sales and we do like pipeline review, we plot out throughout the year, like when we think our revenue is going to hit month by month. And then we just like see how we're tracking against that monthly target. So it's like, well, how much do we think we're going to get in January? How much do we think we're going to get in February, et cetera? And so now I have a literal template, a spreadsheet that I give anyone um, who wants it to help them build out their model, because it like immediately removed all the stress and anxiety from my life, because it turned out that I was actually usually like on track or ahead of my goal. I just didn't know because I was staring at like months of zero, on the tracker. Um, so, and I'll share one more example if that's okay. So something that consultants, I work with a lot of HR people that are now business entrepreneurs, and we're just not, I'm generalizing, but like I'm not that great at thinking about like the sales and like BD side of it. And so something else that I really struggled with that now I like help others with is like really understanding what you're earning, like minimums. It starts with the minimum. So it's like literally how much money do you need to survive and make this a thriving business for yourself when you don't have that steady W-2, bi-monthly salary coming in anymore. A lot of people don't even know what that number is. And so they, again, like so much anxiety comes from just like feeling like you're failing or feeling like you're not going to be able to, you know, pay the bills that month, when really if you just like run the math, do the formula, and know what that earning minimum is, then you're like, okay, like again, I'm on track. Like it says I need to be making this much by June. I'm making this much by June. Like, okay, we're doing great. And then it gives you the freedom to like take vacation or like do a passion project or take on a pro bono client or like do anything else that you want to do with your life outside of this solopreneur journey. Um, on the flip side of that, um, so that's sort of like a scarcity mindset and like fear. That's one fun thing that comes with entrepreneurship. The other thing that can come is like the flip side is like ego and like grow, 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 and like building this like empire. And that's also not fun and some things I struggled with on and off throughout the years. And so, kind of year two, year three, with some help from a therapist, we talked about earning maximums. And so it's just all these things were very counterintuitive to me. Like they just like were not obvious that not only do you need a minimum, which makes sense, but you also need a maximum again so that you know like when you're done. It's like when can I just go play? When can I work on like a research project? When can I just, again, like volunteer at the library at my daughter's school? And so those were just some of the things that have helped me. Um, and there's so many more. But those are just some like basic ones that come to mind that have like relieved so many sleepless nights.
Nice. Thank you. We're going to open it up to audience questions in just a minute. But before we do, I want to ask each of you because I can't believe we've gone 40 minutes without talking about this elephant in the room, which is AI. This sort of, right? I think of it as large in the world as the invention of fire in all of our lives, right? Like as big as the wheel. What is the role of AI in a world where we need to figure out our purpose, in a world of the need for constant reinvention? Susie.
Well, what is the role of AI? I mean, what is the role of us? I mean, that's the bigger question. I think AI. Look, I think one of the great benefits of being an oldster like me is that you've seen other disruptions. I remember when the internet came and everybody was like, nobody's going to have a job and it's all going to be over. And people adapted. AI is scarier than the internet was. I definitely, one of the things that we say alone in the faculty lounge to each other is the youth are not okay because the youth are scared shitless. Okay, they're scared and they have reason to be scared because the number of jobs that they're being recruited for are dropping a lot, like 20% less in finance, 20% less in consulting. I don't know the answer to your question. I don't know if anybody does. I think I use AI all the time. I kind of dig it. It helps me a lot, but I'm a human being who also puts my brain on it, and I write things to AI like, "Stop hallucinating, you're useless to me." And, like, that's just a dumb wrong answer. I mean, I check AI. As a professor, I'm up against it with my students' essays and their homework. It's just a drag to kind of try to outsmart them using AI, like, homework questions that say things like, "Relate this to your personal experience between the ages of 13 and 17." I mean, you just say stuff to make them like to trick them out of using AI. I don't know where it's going. I know it's gonna change almost everything, and you have to take it into account as you think about your future, but there was no visibility anyway about careers. I actually had a student we just finished one of our three-day intensives. I teach Becoming You in a white blaze of fury, like, for 3 straight days, okay, and I just finished one. I teach 8 hours a day. People come from around the world to do it 'cause that's how we do it in a three-day thing. And as I was going in, there was a mother there with her son. We get a lot of married couples and a lot of parents who are dragging their kids there, and then the parents are the ones who have the nervous breakdown at the end. Um, that just happens all the time. And I was walking in and bumped into a mother and her son, and I said, "Son, so what are you looking for?" He goes, "I just really am here to hope to find that job that gives me lifetime security." And I was actually hard to believe it. I was speechless. I was just like, there are no more jobs with security. I don't know if my job is safe. I mean, maybe they'll replace all the professors. None of my children, all four of my children are employed. None of their jobs are safe. And so I think that we have to think about it as just yet another, you know, event that shows us that we're not in charge, and go with that. But the only thing we can know in the age of AI is ourselves. The only thing we can know is ourselves. So, but we better do that.
Shelby, what advice do you give to entrepreneurs, to founders, to people that you're working with, faced with this need to adapt and not knowing what it's going to look like?
Yeah, I'm with Susie 100%. So I'll just put my own kind of lens on it. So My first tech unicorn back in 2009 was a company called Palantir. And if you know anything about Palantir's culture, it's a very, very intense, like technical shop. Um, if you are not technical, you're kind of second class. But but back then, years before I was told, you cannot get approval on any headcount on your team until you have proven that you have automated, outsourced, every other possible thing before we will throw a human at this problem. So years before this like latest wave of AI that people are freaking out about, like been forced to have that mindset, like a systems mindset. How can we streamline? How can we make this more efficient? How can we automate? How can we use technology? And then let the humans do the human piece, which is not, in my opinion, like not ever replaceable by AI because humans be humaning and they're just making crazy decisions all the time, or else, HR people wouldn't have a job. Um, and and the humans never cease to amaze me of like all the creative behavior that we do, that if if an HR person puts into AI, like, how do I solve this really complex human problem that has all this like political, like business politics and the bureaucracy and this interesting manager behavior, like no AI can like do what a wonderful HR person does and give like a really thoughtful, balanced, like here's the risk, but here's what we're going to do kind of nuanced answer. Um, so the advice that I give entrepreneurs or consultants is in like how I'm approaching it in my own work is like get super super niche on like what your superpower is, and then just continue to like outsource and automate everything. In this state, this comes back to the 4-hour work week thing. So this is not new in my mind. This is not a new mindset to have of like, yes, let's cut out all the busy work. Let's cut out all the admin. Let's use great technology to do our sales, our marketing, our like accounting, like just get all that off of our plate so that we can focus on the really high value work for our clients and the stuff that we're really passionate about.
Yeah, interesting the similarity between both of those answers. Questions from everybody. I'll reiterate as necessary, but feel free to shout out. What questions do you have for these two?
Uh, how old should he be doing that's work?
Our topic, becoming you and the whole class and done the vows with people from the ages of 16 to 78. And so I do think though, people ask when your values are formed, there's two schools of study within values work. There's values formation, how we come to our values. Those are sociologists, psychologists, so forth. And then there's values expression. That's people like me who talk about what your values are and how you live them. But of course, there's overlap between this work. From everything that I've read, studied, and everything I understand intuitively, your values are pretty much set by the age of 25 or so. And because just think about where your values come from. They come from personality, they come from parents, they come from trauma, they come from experience, they come from all different places. By 25, you're sort of in a stew. It's all been stirred up and your values are kind of there. I will say that what changes and can change radically is how much you're expressing them. You may have a value of beholderism, which is the value, one of the oldest values identified by everybody. Beholderism is the value that reflects how much you care about how stuff looks, including yourself. This is a very old value. It's often called aesthetics and other values inventories. And I always say that when people find out they have high beholderism, they want to enter a support group because they're like, oh, God, that can't be me, but it's a proxy for harmony. So don't beat yourself up if it's one of your values. You may have very high beholderism, very high, maybe your second value, but you may not be able to express it until you're 40 because you may not have the dinero to do it. So, to do the values work, I've done it with undergraduates who are 18 years old, and I think that and there's a very large incoming interest in doing this with high school students. I think that the whole methodology is great for high school students simply just to give them the language that there are these things called values. And we're not ta and to understand the values are not virtues. Virtues are social constructs that we all agree are good. Integrity, courage, kindness, those are virtues. Yes, please all have more of them. Values are choices about how you live and work. And just to give young people, anybody at any age, the idea that they'll look, there's 16 values. Okay, there's another inventory that says there's 19, but I like my inventory. There's 16 and you have 16 choices. and that you actually have aptitudes. You have cognitive and emotional aptitudes. What are they? You cannot be good at everything. 4 people in the whole world are. And that you may have work, and to open people's aperture about what kind of work exists. There's such so many conveyor belts that people get at. There's incredible research that shows that when kids leave high school, they're actually aware of 5 jobs. 2 of those are their parents' work. And then there's like teacher, police officer, and fireman. Okay. And then you think, oh, they go to college, they're going to have a much higher awareness. Same research, 7 jobs. And you know what those 2 jobs coming in are? That's the group think that everybody says, oh, you've got to go get a job at X. You know when it gets really bad? Graduate school. Then they're down to like 3 jobs because they're getting on the conveyor belts to go where their graduate educations are getting them. When I was in business school, it was 3 things. 80% of us, banking, consulting, or tech. There's 135 industries, and we all know how many roles there are, and like, operations, logistics, you name it. And so this is an incredibly long-winded answer to your question, which is at any age. Okay.
Yeah, Lotus.
Sorry about that.
That was
You pushed one of my buttons.
Lotus.
You, what shows your ancestors are given out of you, your life so far? I mean, what do you hope?
Yeah. What would your ancestors be most proud of for who you are, and what do you hope to leave your descendants?
I just so you're it's your turn.
Okay. No pressure. Well, I'll just tell you what comes to mind for me and kind of what gets me out of bed in the morning is in our field of HR, it's predominantly women. And so the thing that, kind of gives me the most fulfillment these days is that I'm helping so many women in their careers kind of see a path that they maybe don't see for themselves that I trudged my way through, burned a lot of bridges along the way. And so I think like generations of women are kind of like, standing on the shoulders of those before. And I'm trying to do my part. I'm also raising a daughter, and so just trying to, show her like she knows mom is a boss, and have brought her to some conferences, and she sees me on stage, and she sees me like work in the expo hall, and she's like, "Damn, mom is a boss." She doesn't say that; she's 9, but but she sees it, and I'm just trying to model that for her and all the other girls out there.
Beautiful man for us. I'm Sicilian. So let's start there. Brought my whole family to Sicily to go to our village, Caltanissetta. It's a sulfur mining village in the middle of Sicily. If you watch White Lotus, it's not like that. Okay. It is like it was an incredibly poor village. The boys went into the mines at 6 years old. And we all went back to see where we actually had some people go ahead of us and find out where we lived. It was just unbelievable to see the poverty that we came from. And then we went to the graveyard because in 1904 there was a gigantic explosion in the sulfur mines, and almost all the men in the village and the boys in the village all died. And then they shut the sulfur mine, including members of my own family. And we went to go look at their gravestones, their little tiny gravestones, because they were so poor. And who was left behind? The women, right? And my sisters and I just held each other and sobbed and sobbed. It was just overwhelming to see what we come from. And the women left the village, almost the entire village left at the same time and went to Rochester, New York. And my sister Ellen was saying, she's a doctor. She was saying, I'm so sad. I'm so sad. And I said, I'm so overjoyed. They'd be so proud of us. Look what we've done. Look at us. We're here visiting them, traveling around, going to like wineries in Sicily. And like, they couldn't imagine our lives. This happened because of them, because of the sacrifices they made. And I just felt unbelievable. Um, Gratitude to them, gratitude. They were fierce, fierce Sicilian women. Um, so my kids are grown, so I kinda know about the legacy. Kids, so it's complicated. You model a lot of stuff and then you hope it works out. I mean, kids are very complicated and they turn out how they turn out. I mean, it's interesting. I was the boss. I was always running things, and And I'm very, very proud. All my children have great jobs and work a ton. They share my value around work centrism. But uh, one of my children, because she saw what a struggle it was to be a working mom, has decided not to have children, which is kind of heartbreaking to me. Because I'm really digging grandmotherhood. That's good stuff. That is good. I mean, okay, so please somebody ask me about my granddaughter. So, but anyway, so I don't. The legacy is mixed. I mean, I was the best mom I could be. I worked constantly. I worked 80-hour weeks when my kids were growing up. I still work 80-hour weeks, and they still watch me and like say, please work less. But you don't know what you're gonna get. They got to make their own path.
Yeah, please.
World where there's seems an agency lap at the Amari's awful lot about that. Uh, and they increasing their vices and risk out. How do you get to how you can what they of what they are they Larry uh Bridgie Val yeah.
I mean, this is why it's called the values bridge. That name is very intentional. I will say empathy is a virtue. Okay, so everybody should have more of it. I don't think this is up for debate. Okay, I think that so I don't want to discuss with anybody the value of empathy. It's just that's a virtue. Everyone should have more. But we still get in fights and we really judge each other about things that truly are values, like how much you work. There and how much you value achievement. These are two very controversial values that people make choices on. So work centrism is the value that measures how much you like to work for work's sake. And achievement is how much you place a value, how much you want a life of success that other people can see. And then there's the value of what we call eudaimonia, which is the Greek word for flourishing, self care, recreation, pleasure, joy, sex, even. It goes into eudaimonia. And what ends up happening is we get really mad at each other when somebody has a different value than us. Like I have high work centrism, and other people in this room have lower work centrism. And what we end up doing is saying, you're a workaholic and you're lazy. That's what we say to each other. And that's just terrible. That's mean and it's wrong. And I much rather have conversations where we say, there's a value called work centrism. I'm at one end of that continuum. I have higher work centrism and you have lower work centrism. Now let's have a great conversation and build a bridge. I have had people go through this, take the values bridge and write and say things like, I just had the first sort of non-acrimonious conversation with my partner or my kids in 10 years. Because if you can just take the you out of it and say, achievement is a value. Every value has consequences. If you have high achievement, something gives. If you have one of the biggest things, my students are young, and so they often present with having their number one value be eudaimonia, self-care. This is very generationally correct. And by correct, I mean it's just generationally 75% of Gen Z has eudaimonia as their number one value. We understand why. We can see why. Their number two value is affluence. And then they come up to me and they're staring at the results and they say, Professor Welch, is this a problem? And I say, look, I didn't make the rules. I don't be, but it's pretty hard to live 100% of your eudaimonia and also become filthy rich. You got to be very, very good. People have done it, but it ain't easy. And so I think that, but it allows the conversation. It allows the bridge. I've seen so I mean, if I do one thing in my life to have created a language where people can build bridges between each other in talking about values that have been more than enough, I would be very happy if that happened. And I see it happening, so it's kind of cool.
More questions. You have time for, yeah, one or two more.
Oh, this is okay. Do you want to answer? Go ahead.
Well, I just want to share something that comes to mind for me, and I keep speaking to the people leaders because I feel like there's a lot of them in the room. Um, but something that comes up a lot and has as it pertains to like organizational growth and like if you're on kind of a hyper growth team, what's constantly happens is like the bar keeps moving or like the role expectations keep changing for individuals. And so something that I love that happens or when it can happen in a really healthy, thoughtful way is when like maybe the role has outgrown you or you've outgrown the role and and that's totally awesome, and that's totally normal, and that doesn't mean failure. I how this shows up a lot is that people think, there's like the individual contributor track and there's the manager track, and like I like success is becoming a chief people officer one day. Like that's success, or a chief revenue officer or whatever. Um and that's, them kind of working towards this value that they think they have, or that they do have. But that's why I love the assessment, by the way, and I've taken it, and I encourage all of you to take it, because it like really helps you understand, like, is that the goal? Like, is chief people officer the goal, or is like maybe I just want to be like a really kick ass business partner, and like that is success, and that is an incredible role and so vital to a company's success. And yeah, you don't have like the C title, but you are thriving, and then it also maybe gives you like more flexibility, or to pick up the other values in your life. So I want to hear Susie's answer, but I think that and this is what a lot of the coaching I do with heads of people and people that have said, like, I'm maybe exploring this consulting route, is like them really grappling with like, well, I thought my path was going to be this one path, and um, maybe that's not what I need or want. And how like awesome that can be, because I've seen so many success stories of where a head of people's like, I think I'm getting fired. I think I'm getting fired. And like, yeah, you are, but let's make this like a really awesome experience for you.
Um, this is a gigantic question around which I have a lot of research. Organizations have values. And woe to the person who is working in an organization where there's a gigantic values mismatch. And I do increasing amount of work with organizations about the organization's values and then the team's values. So I was brought into a large tech company, which was remain nameless but starts with a G, and they had a very dysfunctional team. And I did the work with the managers, and they identified the values that they wanted what they believed the values of the team were, and they were, not surprisingly, achievement, work centrism, scope, belonging, all these values that most organizations had. And she said, okay, now we're going to test the entire team. It was a tech team, 35 people. And I said to her, I'm very nervous about this because I think you're going to find out that your team does not have the values that you espouse. And she said, yep. And I said, but they might leave. And she said, yep. And then we did the test, everybody took it, and in fact, she was exactly right, that the team did not have the values, and so she basically said, "Look, these are the values of the team. If you wanna be happy and grow here, these are the values, that we really believe in, and some of you may be self-selecting to go to companies that match your values." And so there's increasing amount of this being applied, and I do think, for better or for worse, um, uh, this is a road we all must take, which is we must find the company that has the closest, or the industry, because sometimes industries have values. One of my daughters is in entertainment. Sometimes whole industries have values that match our values. And people kind of leave because they sort of can't put their finger on it, but that's what's going on. So I'll quickly say this piece in the journal where we that's coming up it identifies what the values are of Gen Z, and the values are that hiring managers are looking for. And this is the reason that there's a lot of friction in the workplace, is that Gen Z has values that are not the same as the values that most companies have. And Gen Z is saying, change this company to have my values. And that's just, until the marketplace is different, and we can't find people to hire, it's not going to work that way. Companies are like, yeah, we're not going to be doing that. So I think it's very, very, very important. I mean, to find the company that shares your personal values. Otherwise, you're just going to feel like you're in a suit that's the wrong size.
Well, thank you both, Shelby, Susie. Let's give a warm round of applause. Thank you both very much.